So I'm in this situation, and when she contacts his therapist basically ghosts me. My mother's still acting as if she has no idea what's going on, and I'm trying to contact Tampa PD to get some kind of answer at what's going on, simply because this therapist is either scamming my mother. In other words, he's just taking money from my mother, saying that he's going to contact me and things are going to be solved, and yet he's contacting me and ghosted me. In other words, he contacted me once. I was like, yeah, this is what's going on. And he was like, yes, that's concerning. I'm going to do some things. Hasn't done them. And obviously, like I said, it's an urgent matter because I actually need a refill of my medication. So I'm contacting Tampa PD, and this is how it goes.
Thank you to Tampa Police Department's main line. If you have an emergency, please hang up and dial 911. Normal business hours for most operations of the Tampa Police Department are Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. For information in English, please press 1. For information in Spanish.
I'm going to fast forward a little bit.
I have a situation where it seems like there's a crime in process, but I'm not exactly sure what's going on. I have a therapist that seems to be scamming my mother.
What do you mean scamming? How is this person scamming your mother?
He's not providing correct services. He's not addressing the situation as needed.
Where is this going on?
In Tampa.
Where exactly in Tampa is this?
Well, are you not understanding the situation? Like, do you believe it to be like what are you asking me? Like his office address, or what are you?
Correct.
Well, I can provide that, but what I'm kind of trying to figure out is what's the best way to approach this, because I've tried to approach it different ways. I've tried to approach it by wellness checks. I've tried to have you guys involved, and all that's actually happened is it's gotten worse, and now it's to a point where there's this therapist involved.
So I wanna address that real quick about the wellness checks, right? So what has happened is my mother has acted delusional. There's been times that she's basically said she may hurt herself, it seems. And so I've called the police on wellness checks. And when they get there, my mother has even stated this. She deletes the text messages between us, and then just lies to the police. And then the police, for some reason, don't follow up. They don't ask any questions. In other words, I'm calling the police because of my mother's text messages. My mother's stating that she's deleting them, and yet they're not addressing that fact. In other words, like, they're just going by her words, which again, it's one of those situations where I don't know if my mother's doing this on purpose or not, because there would be a reason, as odd as it sounds, for my mother to be doing this on purpose to kind of prove how inept these police officers have been in addressing what's important. So anyway, let's go on with the phone call.
And so it's kind of it's confusing in the sense of, realistically, your actions, the police's actions, is what's kind of.
And also, so this is what's also frustrating about this situation. Now, it's a complicated situation. There's a lot of things going on. It involves San Francisco and Tampa and everything else. So I'm trying to keep the focus on just what's the most important thing and relevant to Tampa PD, which would be the situation in that this therapist has now contacted me. This is not like previously where it's just my mom saying whatever. This is a licensed professional has contacted me, and there's no justification so far as to why he contacted me. And being that he's a licensed professional, that's what would kind of warrant some kind of investigation or follow up on what's going on. So when he's asking me, like, where's the location of this, about a therapy session, and he's a police officer, a detective, it makes no fucking sense in the sense of, like, yeah, I guess it could have happened in the office, but it's not really, that's not really the focus of it. Like, this isn't a sexual assault call. Like, I'm not like, oh, this therapist sexually assaulted me. That is not the only form of a crime that could happen with a therapist, but yet that's what this police officer is approaching the situation as, as if the only crime that could possibly happen would be some sort of actual physical crime. So just on that alone, it's kind of like when I'm reviewing things, it's like I don't know how to approach it, but it's also because these police officers are approaching it in the most idiotic, weird way possible, in which they're taking a situation that's very simple and look how complicated they're making it straight from the beginning, in which this police officer, a detective, is stating, he's approaching the situation as if he believes this to be a situation in which there's going to be actual kind of like physical evidence of a crime other than the written word. So anyway, moving on
to this, and it's already made things kind of worse. So I'm trying to figure out what's the appropriate, like, in other words, what I can't have happen is, because it only, again, makes it kind of worse, is report to you a crime that is a crime, but you're not taken seriously.
And to kind of clarify that, put that a different way, right? My mother, again, she's either doing this on purpose or she is actually has mental health issues. One way or the other, she herself has contacted a therapist. This is not a situation in which I'm just going by hypothetical kind of like, what if my mom contacted a therapist, which indicates that she believes something should be addressed. So kind of like moving on from that, this police officer, even from the initial point of this call, which is an actual crime that's in progress, again, it's a situation that is urgent. I can die off of this. It may not be immediate, but it's a very known and clear situation in which I do need to refill my medication. Right now, the reason that it's being basically blocked is because all these police officers are taking this approach of that there's absolutely nothing to investigate, even though there are ongoing crimes happening, including ones that could result in my death.
Okay, but at this point, what I can do is I can refer you to one of our district offices. You can speak to an officer there. They can take your statements and determine if a crime has been committed, okay?
Okay.
Your number is going to be 931 6500.
Look, are you able to transfer? Are you able to transfer, or do I have to call?
So while he transfers me, obviously I wasn't even talking to the detective at that point. So, I guess it's a perfect example of how, I don't know what's the best way to approach. I don't know if I should just be frantic and making no sense, because I'm trying my best to try to make sense. But obviously, also I can see already that's complicated matters. But let's see what happens once the detective gets on. Should be kind of shortly. The weird thing is there's no music or anything, so the whole time I wasn't even sure if I was on hold.
Okay, what's going on?
So I have a situation in which the most recent situation is that there's a therapist involved that is a therapist who practices in Tampa, who seems to be scamming my mother for money. But I don't really have much more information than that, simply because it seems to be a scam. Like, in other words, he's contacted me for information. There would be normal steps that would be taken from that information, and he's not doing anything with them. And I'm not exactly sure how best to proceed, because in the past when I've tried to report it kind of as a wellness check, in other words, my mother's mental health status, she has just lied and made it kind of basically made the situation worse.
Now, I kind of want to just pause there for a second, thinking of it as a detective, right? If I'm going to put myself in his shoes, the first thing that I'm going to understand from that situation is, even though I didn't state this, is my mother's obviously his patient. So that's the relationship of that therapist. In other words, that therapist, the reason they would be reaching out to me is in the process of medical kind of treatment. So I'm going to move on from that, but it's odd to me that the officer and detective, more than anything, seems to somehow or another not made that connection in his head. Like that should be a checklist of, as I'm talking about somebody, obviously my relation to them, as far as the law is concerned, changes things. In other words, if I'm talking about my mother, it changes things versus if I'm talking about a distant cousin, or I'm talking about my neighbor, or I'm talking about my landlord, or I'm talking about my boss. All those legally have different kind of status. So kind of moving on.
So the officers have not. Basically, what's kind of happened is they've taken false accusations and taken them seriously. Basically, yeah, seriously, but not investigated them, and then taken real accusations, and haven't taken them seriously, and also haven't investigated them. So I'm kind of stuck in a situation in which I don't know what's the best way to approach it, but there is an urgent matter going on. So.
Okay, I mean, you can always report it to our online site, at tampa.gov /police/online reporting. Because at this point, I mean, I don't really know what else you have other than someone contacting you.
No, it's not someone. It's a licensed therapist. They contacted me.
And just kind of to reiterate that point again, this is a detective that I'm speaking to, who's his approach to this phone call is acting as if he has no idea of the law, has no understanding of what would be the difference between domestic violence and just assault and battery. Just to kind of put an example out there. Domestic violence would be, somebody you live with, somebody you have an actual relationship with, while the same act would, be normally considered assault or battery if it would happen between someone who you didn't have any prior relationship with.
To do actions. In other words, they contacted me because my mother contacted them. My mother wanted them to have, there be actions from their call. There haven't been any actions from their call, so it's very simple in the sense of they have services that they say they have provided. They haven't provided those services. There are questions as to whether or not my mother's mental health status is there as it is. So there's basically, there's a clean-cut way of just, well, right now it seems as if there's been services provided that haven't been. But then there's also the added situation of my mother's mental health status, which, is what she was trying to provide, which is what she was trying to get services for. So that's really the only issue is the inability for the police to focus on one thing.
And I'm going to kind of go into that again with that. Because again, now we're already, look at this phone call. It's basically an argument. And the fact of the matter is, no one has the right to just be calling you randomly, period. Whether it be citizen to citizen or company to a company. All of those are, there's different laws kind of regulating them in different municipalities, but it's pretty generally understood that you don't have the right to just call people for the fun of it. In this situation, you definitely don't have the right to either be impersonating a therapist. This is actually a real therapist. But then if you are a therapist, you don't have the right to be calling someone stating that there are medical reasons for them to contact you. In this particular case, I didn't mention as well, but this therapist also has stated that there's an urgency to the actions that he needs to do, and then hasn't done them. That's why I'm calling. This isn't just some random person who called me and said, "Hey, Charlie, you won $1,000," and I'm like, "Oh, cool, I won $1,000," and didn't give me the $1,000. This is a therapist that said, "Hey, I'm contacting you because your mother is my patient, and now having spoken to you, I believe certain urgent actions should be taken, and that therapist hasn't taken them." This police officer is not understanding that. And while I wasn't able to explain it the same way I'm explaining it now, realistically, that's kind of the issue. He should have already understood that. But kind of moving on.
Okay, I'm just confused as to what exactly it is you're trying to report.
You really. So in other words, A therapist that my mother hired contacted me stating that he would do some actions. He has not done those actions, provide services. There's money involved. This isn't just a person.
Something, but he actually didn't.
Exactly. And since there's money involved, this is not just a random person.
He tried to ask you for money?
No. Again, so because he doesn't. This isn't just a random person. You're taking the approach
I
that.
understand.
Well, then you would understand that it's a business transaction. So again, I do understand that what I do. That's why I'm speaking to you. So there is an intersection here of both civil and criminal. So there is a civil aspect to it as well, but there is a criminal aspect because he is a licensed provider as well. And so it creates a situation for myself and anyone who's in this position in which when I'm speaking to a police officer, because I am the victim, I am the person who's infected by this. There are two different ways that I'm seeing it.
He tells you someone contacted you, but you're not telling me what he did to you.
So I'm stopping right there. Again, now we're about 6 minutes into this phone call, or 8 minutes, and I'm basically having to argue with this police officer who is not understanding how it could be that if a therapist who has a patient, my mother has contacted this therapist on her own. This therapist is not even supposedly. This therapist is, that's her. She is this therapist's patient. This therapist has contacted me. Again, I kind of left this out because it's not really that relevant, but the therapist has contacted me stating that he understands there's an urgency to actions that he needs to do. Basically what I'm leaving out is, as far as the conversation I had with this therapist was, he needed to have an intervention with my mother in order to ensure that I could get provided proper medical care, but as well because of the fact that, again, this is a very simple situation. My mother contacted him because she believes something is wrong. There is something wrong, and this therapist is not only not doing anything about it. Obviously, because he's a therapist, he would have received funds or had asked for them, and even regardless, because he's acting in a professional capacity, there are questions and needs to be investigated as to the criminal nature of his acts. That can't be answered without an investigation. That's why I'm speaking to the officer. Yet, to
you clearly many times he did not provide services.
Told you that he gave you services?
I'm sorry, what?
What I have gathered so far is that he contacted you to tell you that he's provided services to your mother.
That my mother is his patient, yes.
Okay. Why is that illegal in nature to you?
again, this is a police officer, a detective. At this point in time, he, for some reason, seems to not understand that there is an issue with that therapist contacting me. In other words, and not providing services afterwards. In other words, it would be similar to a doctor contacting me saying, hey, I need to know whether or not your mother is allergic to this or has this happened in her lifetime. And my mother says, because in this situation, she has contacted the doctor. My mother is saying, hey, ask Charlie about this. And then the doctor asked me about it, says, hey, I thank you for providing that information. That information is important, that I do something with that information. And then the doctor didn't do anything with that information. Obviously, that is a situation in which you can sue afterwards. But considering the fact that there are right now ongoing effects that can be stopped and should be stopped of that person's actions, in the example of it's affecting my ability to get a refill on my congestive heart failure medication, which could lead to my death fairly immediately. It should be understood. But this cop is just, he's just arguing. It's weird.
No, that particular part isn't. But you're only focusing on one part.
Okay.
So
Do because that's where we seem to keep going back to.
No, that's what you're going back to. That's what you're going back to. I've already gone way past that and explained a lot more than just that one point. You're focusing on just that point.
So what's the criminal aspect that you're trying to tell me about?
So I already said it many, many times.
One more time.
Here's the confusing part to me. When somebody gets money for something and they don't for a service. In other words, I'm saying I'm gonna sell you a laptop, and I actually sell you just an empty box.
Okay, let's not do a hypothetical.
It's not a hypothetical. It's not a hypothetical.
And I just kind of want to go on this because this is a pattern with the police, the way they've been approaching things. This is an example of them not wanting to, in any realm, get to the truth, right? Now, the reason why I say that's not a hypothetical, as far as somebody selling you a box, selling you an empty box, saying that they sold you a laptop, and knowing that's illegal. That's one of those weird situations where, when I first moved to San Francisco, I was in college. Basically, a peer, a person who was in college with me, bought a laptop like that in the street, or a computer like that in the street, where they ended up buying a box, and it was just kind of like this weighted box. There was no computer in it. There was a whole kind of thing about whether or not that could even be reported to the police. I thought that it could not at all. And the fact is that it could, because that is a crime. This is something in which I know for a fact is a crime, at the very least, in San Francisco. So it's not, at the very least, something that it's unheard of to be a crime anywhere. And yet again, this cop is doing this weird thing where he's trying to make it a hypothetical, as if there's never been a case of someone actually trying to sell someone a box, saying there are certain items inside it, and when the person opens the box, there weren't those items inside it, and subsequently there was a crime reported and tried for that. So that's what I'm saying. Like, that's the weird shit of, like, this is a cop. That's a motorcycle driving by, but this is a cop in Tampa, and this is the struggle to just report an ongoing crime.
I know.
This is an actual real situation.
Tell me what he did.
He did not provide services for money rendered. We have no idea what that money is, but because of the fact, and this is what's confusing, because of who he is.
Whose money was it that he took?
Officer, please, since you're a detective, understand this part of it. You're again putting him in a position which is incorrect. In other words, you're making it seem as if you are, and you're not letting me finish. You are, simply because you are not acknowledging the fact that there should be no communication between me and him unless it involves money.
I don't understand why that's the case.
Because he's a therapist who gets paid for his services.
At all unless there's money involved.
I'm sorry, what?
You said that he shouldn't be contacting you unless there's money involved.
That is correct. He's a therapist.
Why is that?
So again, you're a police officer with Tampa PD, is that correct?
Correct.
Would you just be calling me as a friend?
I wouldn't expect money in return just because
No, you wouldn't expect money in return, but you would expect there to be a legal issue.
No, I wouldn't.
Oh, so you just want to call me for fun? We're going to be friends now? Because that's what you're implying that therapist is saying to me.
What you're saying is I wouldn't call someone and expect money in return. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, well, again, I'm trying to just get an understanding of your mind state as a police officer and a detective with Tampa PD, who seems to not understand something simple as a therapist, a licensed mental health therapist who contacts someone and is not contacting them in the line of duty. In other words, for a patient, as a therapist who is contacting them, there would be money involved. Otherwise, that would be illegal, because at that point in time, they would be using their status as a therapist, but interacting with the public as a public figure. It's very similar as if he would put on a police officer's uniform and call me as a police officer when he's off duty.
So your issue with him is that he called you as a therapist, not in a therapist capacity.
Seemingly so. Again, that's where investigation would have to happen, because there is no answer.
Why would an investigation come from that, sir?
Why would there not be? What answer do you have to it?
I'm telling you that that's not an issue and not criminal in nature.
So your answer would be that he called me outside of his, professional capacity. He was just calling me for fun, even though my mother's his patient.
I suppose so.
You suppose so?
I don't even know what the nature of the call was for. What did he call you for?
Well, that's exactly. So that's why it's really difficult to understand. You, as a Tampa police officer, is stating once again that you don't understand why an investigation would be needed with as many questions as you have.
Okay, can you just answer my question as to why he called you?
Yes, because this is happening. Again, I don't know where you believe this whole thing where we're friends, and I just. Again, what's your name?
I'm just asking you what the purpose of the phone call
And
was.
it's to get your name, because I'm speaking to a public official.
Yes, Officer Cruz.
All right,
What was
Officer
the purpose
Cruz.
of the phone call?
So, Officer Cruz, the purpose of the phone call, because I don't have your personal number, I don't know you in personal life, and I have nothing else to speak to you about, is a actual criminal act that is happening in Tampa, in which you just stated yourself you have questions about.
That is not illegal, sir.
You can't even state what isn't illegal. What is not illegal?
What is not illegal? A lot of stuff, sir.
Exactly, but I didn't call you with a random question. I've been speaking to you now for about 15 minutes. So, from what I've said, isn't illegal?
It is not illegal to call someone because they're a therapist.
That's not what I said happened. Again, you're leaving out things, which is odd. A therapist, in the process of a procedure, contacted me in order to perform another procedure that has not been performed.
Now, I wonder if that even clears anyone, because maybe if I said it a different way. A therapist called me because he was hired by my mother to be to be her therapist. In other words, my mother is her patient who said to the therapist, hey, in order for you to be able to provide therapy to me, you'll need to contact Charlie. So the therapist contacts me and says, hey, in order to perform, therapy with your mother, I need to contact you. Your mother has given that permission. She wants this to happen. And I say to the therapist, great. This is what's going on now that you've spoken to me. The therapist says, now that I've spoken to you, there are things that I need to do. In other words, he spoke to me and said, this is a big deal. I need to do things urgently. I'm going to speak to your mother. I'm going to do other things, and then I will get back to you. Then he did not get back to me. Because this situation also involves my personal medical health and my personal medical thing, it becomes urgent in two different ways. One, because my mother has contacted a therapist in Tampa who has stated they're going to complete tasks that they did not. And it's unknown how much money my mother has paid for those things. It's unknown whether or not that's even legal, considering the fact that this, the doctor is stating that legally there were certain things he was supposed to do that he did not do. That's why an investigation would have to be done. So if I go around and around, just maybe saying it a different way.
Now, that leaves the question, as you said, as to what was the purpose of his call. Because either he's either doing malpractice or scamming for money or something. But there is every reason that there would be for him to contact me at this point is illegal, because he has not done anything with the information as he said he would.
You're being very vague, sir.
No, I'm being extremely specific.
Was he trying to solicit business from you? Was he trying to see if you wanted to be a client of his?
Well, I would, again.
Now, again, so that's one of those weird situations as an officer. The way he's stating it means that he has an understanding that there's an illegal activity happening. No therapist can just contact you trying to solicit business. That's something that maybe a lot of people don't know or understand. But if you think about it logically, that's there's a reason why it's just unfair. No therapist, no doctor. It would be like, random doctors calling you and saying, hey, I think you have this and that, and I think I would be the best doctor for you, and this and that. Really, the doctor can't really do that because it's just wrong, like all around wrong. I wish I could kind of explain it more clearly right now, but it's so simple to understand. And plus, the kind of main point of that is this police officer is stating an understanding of if that doctor was calling me pretty much at any point in time, it would be solicitation. It would be illegal solicitation unless he's able to justify why he was calling me under professional means. And right now, that justification doesn't exist, which is why I am calling the police officer so that an investigation could happen and there would be some understanding as to whether or not the justification exists or not, and, kind of proceed kind of like with any other crime. But right now, the situation is kind of where there is a probable cause. He's just trying to stay blind to it. Although technically right now he kind of showed that he's not blind to it by using and understanding solicitation in that sense. But I'm going to keep playing it. My example of solicitation, it's a little wonky is the best I could put it, because I was kind of saying it off the cuff, and there's certain parts of it that are there's kind of holes in it, and that is not the best example. But here you go.
This is one of those situations where I'm not understanding. A Tampa police officer is not understanding what would be wrong with that situation. Again, you're asking me if he was trying to solicit business. That would be like asking the John whether or not the hooker was trying to solicit him.
That's all I'm asking you.
What do you mean? What are you asking me again?
I'm asking you, when the therapist picked up the phone to call you, why did he call you?
Again, that's why I'm calling you. It is unclear because the reasons he stated are not what he has done. And that makes it a crime in a situation in which he was paid for those services. Everything indicates he was paid for those services. Again, an investigation would have to happen. It's as if if I walked out of the store without a receipt of items, a police officer technically could arrest me and put me in front of a judge, and then it would be on me to put out the receipt later on or some other way prove that I actually did pay for those items. Sure, it would get resolved, but police would be involved in that. And that's exactly like this situation in which right now there are two people that can't seem to there's no...
I hate the fact that I just remembered the way this comes out. It's a really bad example in reference to, yes, that's why it's a popular joke. Technically, if let's say you walked out the store and a cop stopped you and was like, "Hey, did you pay for those items?" In a kind of a weird way, even if the store employees say yes and everything else, technically, it's a really fucked up thing. But the cop could kind of go ahead and arrest you. It's just that it doesn't happen in most places because of how stupid it is. But it is something that used to happen, apparently. Kind of one of those, Jim Crow, black laws kind of things, at the very least that I know, that I've heard many older black men and women express that this is something real that used to happen in real life, where you could be falsely accused of something, and then the onus is on you to kind of prove that you weren't, you know what I mean, you didn't really do it in a situation like that with a receipt. Like let's say the store kind of set you up in a way. The store didn't give you the receipt, and so there's technically you would be able to kind of like subpoena their records and everything else. But if you're poor and the system's kind of against you, that's how that used to work. And so what this officer is referring to, somewhat sadly, because he's in Florida, is a kind of a support and an encouragement. And the reason why these laws were stopped is because they never just affect one group of people. The person who is willing to do these types of acts will do them to anybody they can. It's just that they'll usually focus on one group, but it never. There's not many situations, if any, in which the person wouldn't do it to someone else. In other words, like, yeah, sure, a racist person against blacks would probably focus on doing it to blacks, but the fact is they would definitely do it to somebody else of another race as well. So anyway, that little fucking side note on that.
There's no receipt. And so because there is no receipt, the proper person to ask would be the therapist, since he is the one who is supposed to be able to provide one.
And that kind of goes back to what I was saying. Even the law works that way. Like if I had walked out of a store without a receipt, and I ended up getting arrested for it, again, just to make this really clear, because I don't want to throw that energy out there for anybody. That's an absolutely ridiculous situation. But like I'm saying, the proper person to ask would be the store employees at that point in time, to be able to provide a receipt. Many reasons. It costs society and the city and everybody else much more money to have somebody arrested and have to go to court and all that shit over something like that, when realistically the onus would be and should be on the store to be able to provide receipts quickly and timely, to avoid all that just waste of time and money.
That's not the same thing, first officer, and there's nothing illegal in nature of that. Is there any other question you have for me?
No, if you believe that there is absolutely nothing illegal about a therapist contacting me in the line of duty and then not performing the services that he performs, in other words, receiving payment of unknown nature just for calling me, acting as a therapist, even though obviously he was just doing it for fun.
Again, I kind of want to just reiterate this because this is something that I know for a fact. Just because, I've had family who has worked in the medical field for a very long time. And so this is similar to a situation of, let's say somebody's in getting ready to go they need to have an operation, emergency operation. That person either is not conscious or has already said, hey, you have to contact this other person before you can do this procedure. In this situation, that would be like my mother contacting the therapist and saying, hey, I need a procedure. The therapist saying, yes, I agree that you need that procedure. And them both understanding that in order to proceed with that procedure, they would have to contact me. In other words, like my mother's in the operating room, she's getting ready to have an emergency operation. She's told the doctor, you need to contact Charlie before you could do that. The doctor contacts me. And then from that contact says to me, hey, there's certain things I have to do because of what you just told me, and then doesn't do them. So that's the situation we're at. It should be very easy to understand, but this police officer is trying to make it as if this doctor that my mother has said, hey, you need to contact Charlie before this procedure is done. He's kind of acting as if this doctor called me in order to for the fun of it. In other words, as if I wouldn't be necessary. Because otherwise, I would not need to be involved. It would just be between the doctor and my mother. So hopefully I didn't get too sidetracked on that, and this is almost over.
On evaluation, you believe that's perfectly legal for someone to imposter a mental health professional?
It is not criminal in nature, and if there's payments that you believe were not supposed to be made on your card or your account, then you can put up with it with the law.
See, and again, this is just one of those situations where I want to point out, again, this police officer is being contacted because a therapist has a patient in Tampa. That therapist has stated that the reason they were contacting me was in order to provide therapy for that patient. When they contacted me, the therapist then stated that there were certain things that needed to happen that didn't happen. The person who would be charged for that would be my mother, since she's the patient. And again, the question there would be whether or not, my mother is even mentally able to understand that this person is basically victimizing her by stating that they are going to do things that they're not doing. And because of the fact of the situation that she has contacted him because of her mental health state, that makes it even more concerning. Somehow this police officer is disregarding all of that during this phone call. And again, I think there's maybe like 30 seconds or so left.
You can go through it civilly, but there's nothing criminal done at the time.
Okay, he's impersonating, so that's fine.
All right, so that's pretty much it. So for anybody, your true crime people, this is what it's like to be living in a situation in which crimes are basically happening. It's a lot more complicated than this. There's links to other things, but this is just kind of one aspect of a greater amount of different crimes going on. But hopefully, kind of gives you an understanding of how bigger crimes happen. And because if I was mentally in a different state right now, instead of just posting this and doing this, I know there would just be different things going on. The fact of the matter is, it just is what it is. It's better to post this and kind of have people hopefully have an understanding of how the police department, at the very least in my case, and it seems in many others, actually encourage and kind of participate in in criminal acts going without consequence. So there's that.